Welcome to Porch Play Chats, sponsored by the American Association for the Child's Right to Play, or more affectionately titled IPA USA. IPA USA is the USA affiliate of the International Play Association, and as part of our efforts to support play, we've introduced Porch Play Chats, which are conversations with people who are just as passionate about play as we are. You can find almost 300 Porch Play Chats free to you if you go to the IPAUSA.org website, and up in that top right-hand corner, friend us, follow us, subscribe to our YouTube channel, our Instagram, and our Facebook page. And magically, every Monday morning, a new Porch Play Chat will appear in your feed. We also have begun uploading Porch Play Chats to Spotify, and you can also get that link up in that top right-hand corner. And eventually, probably by the end of 2025, we will have all 300 up there on Spotify for you, so that you can access any one at any time. I'm Deb Lawrence, and I'm president of IPA USA. With me on the porch today is Karyn Allee. Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm well. How are you, Deb?
I'm wonderful. So Karyn is an assistant professor of elementary education at Mercer University, and Dr. Allee's research focus is on how poverty affects young brains and cognitive development, executive function, and self-regulation as predictors of school achievement, and instructional strategies that actually mitigate the effects of that chronic toxic stress and reduce achievement gaps. This is like one of my huge pieces is how trauma impacts development. So I'm so excited for this topic. Specifically, she's interested in studying how executive function and self-regulation mediate poverty, exploring best practices for instruction and assessment that integrate executive function and self-regulation, researching the immediate and long-term impacts of various instructional and assessment strategies, analyzing curricula in correlation with academic achievement, and in improving the transition from preschool environments to public primary grades. So, OMG. So today, Karyn's going to talk to us about the power of playful pedagogy, addressing equity through play. So, this is like a huge passion and the primary objective of IPA USA. So my question to you is, how does play-based learning create opportunities for anti-bias and anti-racist teaching? And what are some examples of what that looks like in practice?
I mean,
Could be a journal article, right?
it could be many journal articles, I think. So, having been a classroom teacher for so long, I've been in education for 30 years. I can't believe time has flown by so quickly, but I can think back to my practitioner experience, and now I have, kind of a scholarly lens to do that kind of retrospection. And I, in my teacher training, it was the whole language movement. It was the early 90s. It was, pre No Child Left Behind. And so I got to cut my teeth in primary classrooms teaching the way we don't teach anymore, at least not in public elementary classrooms, especially when children or schools or communities are perceived to be at risk. We have this false dichotomy of, to be rigorous, we can't afford to play. And so only kids who are perceived as being okay enough, and far enough along and not a test-taking concern are given those opportunities. Now, I'm speaking of broad generalizations. There are probably some exceptions somewhere, but in my experience, they're few and far between. And my teacher candidates don't come back to class talking about this wonderful, rich, child-driven, authentic, inquiry-based, engaging, autonomous, kind of experience their kids are allowed to have, or even the teachers are allowed to have anymore. So I think there are so many confounding or conflated factors that impact a child's perception of being at risk. our perception of a child being at risk, I should say, because the child doesn't necessarily perceive themselves to be at risk in any way, because these metrics are artificial and imposed by adults who may or may not be educators, right? But certainly their economic status affects that, their environment affects that, their English language proficiency affects that, their their prior life experiences, their family dynamic, all of these factors go into whether a child is perceived to be more or less at risk than another child. And all of those things tend to go hand in hand with one another. We know that English language learners are more likely to experience economic insecurity. We know that Black and Brown children are more likely to experience economic insecurity. If you are in an economically insecure household, you're more likely to have food insecurity and housing insecurity and unstable environments around you and unsafe places to play and environmental impacts that go into all of these kind of multi-domain influences and outcomes of child development and whether that's healthy or not. So the long and short of it is, when kids are coming to school and perceived to already be behind, or in a, we're looking at them in some kind of deficit framework, our reaction kind of broadly, at least in this country, is we must double down on our interventions and our support and our tutoring and our efforts to academically catch them up to speed. And we often ignore what else needs to happen to support that child's whole development, to better prepare them to be receptive to these academic interventions we're trying to promote, which are not bad, right? The intentions are good. But if I struggle with working memory or impulse control or those other kinds of prefrontal cortex regulation and executive function skills, I look like I'm not ready for school. I act like I'm not ready for school. And I struggle with some of the academic expectations, especially if my opportunities to move and choose and talk are further restricted for more instructional intervention time. So we kind of set up our children who are the least prepared to sit chained to a desk for 6 hours by giving them more time to be kind of chained to that desk metaphorically. And so play as an instructional approach, as a learning science, the evidence is clear, kids learn through play. Teachers enjoy teaching more when we can teach that way. Instead of doing what will help support the whole child, we're so myopically focused on increasing these very limited range kinds of academic skills that are tested, that we, in my opinion, can set kids up for more failure and more unintended consequences, like externalizing behaviors or all the myriad things we're seeing as unintended effects of all of this school improvement legislation that we've been living through for the past few decades, that we cut off our noses to spite our face a little bit. And so if we were to use more playful, active playful kinds of learning approaches, they're inherently culturally and linguistically responsive. They're inherently developmentally appropriate, with the NACI position statements on developmentally appropriate practice. They're inherently child-centered because they're not scripted and they're not one size fits all. So by doing that, kids are more engaged, but we are also positioning ourselves as educators to be further along that equity continuum of meeting the needs of all of our learners, kind of in a universal design for learning approach, rather than trying to force our learners to fit this one model of teaching and learning, which is so ubiquitous right now.
And it's so disrespectful, right? So, it's really interesting. Every time I do Porch Play Chats, and I do, this is my 5th one today, but there's always a theme that seems to run through. It's like all of you got together and said, well, I'm going to do this part and this part and this part. But it's authentically centered around this idea. This section of Porch Play Chats is centered around what we want to happen is what we're preventing from happening. What we want for children is not being supported by the practices that we're using.
Right.
And it could be people who are making these decisions who think that more is better.
Right.
Versus recognizing that the more that they're doing is not being effective. And so I've moved away in my own vocabulary. I've moved away from developmentally appropriate because I think people have the wrong connotation of that these days. To be, is it developmentally effective? Am I taking this child, this
Yeah.
one right here? Am I
Right.
taking this child and saying, where is this child across all of their domains, not just their cognitive? And what supports can I provide through play
Mm-hmm.
that will help them develop,
Right.
where I could scaffold them when they're ready, but not force everybody to read the same book at circle at the same time when I have some children who can't sit still for even 10 minutes, right?
Right.
Or I'm going to tell them what center they can go to and how long to stay there and what to do there instead of allowing them to choose and develop autonomy and some agency.
Right.
And so we want them to be empowered. We want them to feel confident. We want them to have a positive self-concept. We want them to have agency, yet we give them no opportunities
Right.
to develop that. It's just so crazy to me.
Yes. Yes. It's completely antithetical to what we're trying to accomplish. And there is so much evidence to that effect that,
Mhm.
you know, I I would be on board with the educational improvement legislation that's been put in place. I think in its intention, it was well intended. Um,
Yes.
if we were seeing evidence that we were moving the needle somehow, it would be more palatable, but
Yeah.
we're not. And we're seeing this eruption of all these unintended consequences, increased mental health referrals, increased internal and external suspensions, increased removal from classroom, where if you're out of the classroom and you're already behind, I mean, how can you possibly catch up if you're not able to be in the space where the learning is happening? So it's affecting absenteeism. I was just reading a study where students' absenteeism, which can be tied to feeling safe and successful in school and welcome in school and all that, is also affecting teacher burnout and retention.
Well, of course.
So, I mean, it's all so tied up together. And, and what we've seen, if those of us who've been in the profession for a while, is the increase, the kind of concurrent increase in the number of external actors who are influencing ed policy and education decision making, down to the purchasing of the materials and the structuring of the day, which is not at all developmentally appropriate or effective. And I love that you're reframing it as developmentally effective.
Yeah, because it's become this power down
Mm-hmm.
versus lifting up, right? And
Right.
so, this is the new curriculum that promises me our test scores will go up. Well, I can tell you right now, without even looking at it, it's not going to.
Right.
Right? It's not. It because you're not giving children the foundational supports that they need. You're just reading scripted curriculum, or you're doing large group instruction the entire day versus giving children some choices that they need in order to build that agency. And so yes, I believe sometimes I think in the commercialized world we don't have good intentions, but I mean the people who are trying to sell this curriculum, they may think it's effective, but
Right.
I,
But
you know,
there's a financial motive also, right? So, yeah.
yes, it's that profit making piece. And someone mentioned in an earlier Porch Play Chats today that I've been taping, that it if we did what we know works, right, based on all the research around play, the issue is it doesn't cost money.
Right. Right. But I think there's another issue that goes hand in hand with that. And being in teacher education, I see this. For the past 30 years, we've had an erosion of trust in teachers to behave as professionals. So this idea, for those of us who are there, of a highly effective teacher, and you had to be highly effective. Again, great intention, right? We want that. But the response to that was to teach to the least prepared, least effective teacher, to make sure that everything was standardized, because we're so good as humans at being standardized at anything, which is not at all like how any of this works. But this, I think, began that trend towards removing teacher agency and autonomy and professionalism from how we operate in those spaces with children. And while I love my teacher candidates, if they haven't experienced a playful learning environment as a learner, and they don't see it happening in their schools, and our teacher preparation programs are so condensed to be able to compete with other institutions, because, it's a business.
Standards, yeah.
Right. So, they are not sure where to start with that necessarily. They don't have always a mental framework of what it could look like to be playful in a way that also produces high quality learning outcomes.
And they don't have agency, and because they're fearful of getting in trouble. That's what I'm saying.
Mhm.
Well, I what if I get in trouble? And I said, listen, we have a teacher shortage.
Yeah.
We have childcare teacher shortages. It's not that you don't need to, it's not that you don't need to say, I'm not doing any of that, right? But though I have a stepson who says that to in his middle school, he gets the highest scores on every teacher evaluation that they do with him, and he does nothing they tell him to do. He gets the highest scores.
Yeah.
And they'll come to him and say, well, we want you to use the scripted reading program so they're prepared for the test, whichever one it is,
Right.
in middle school. And he said, I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm doing instead, because this is what will get them to those higher test scores. And they go, okay.
But that goes back to what I was saying, though, that, when there's evidence that the kids are okay enough, then there becomes space for freedom for teachers and students to say, no, we're not doing that. And it takes a certain amount of trust from the classroom teacher and the building and district administrators to let that happen. But if you weren't getting those test scores, it would probably be a different story. And when my son was in school, he was at a high performing school that, they had digital printers, and they had an engineering program, and they had rotary saws, and they did all this cool stuff because they were going to score high anyway. So
yes,
it's that, and that's where that, to go back to the original question, that is
yeah,
where that disproportionality of impact comes in, and that is inherently racist and biased across all the different ways we can be that way. Because if you are perceived to not be able to produce those outcomes, which are the measure by which we evaluate both students and teachers and districts and all of the spaces in public education right now, more so than I think any other environment, then that will be shut down more quickly.
yes.
So, yeah,
And we'll take away recess.
right.
Or we'll use recess as a punishment because you didn't complete your worksheets.
Right.
Or we'll limit the art programs that are available, or we'll limit anything that is extra. And the worst thing is we'll lengthen the school day, and we'll lengthen the school year so that children are miserable and dislike learning.
Right.
And that's, I think, the piece where the long-term impact of what we're doing to children in classrooms who don't already have the resilience to bounce back from that because of whatever circumstance they're going through.
Right.
We're just piling on, and we wonder why suicide rates are up, and depression is up, and anxiety is
Yeah.
up. And
Yeah.
it's just crazy that
But
we're not correlating or even seeing the
right,
cause and effect of
right.
our actions.
And I think we as educators, and then we as a society more broadly, because so many people have opinions about education. It's a political topic, no matter what party
Right.
your candidate is affiliated with. Um, that we run the risk, and we see this playing out, of confirmation bias, because we know some groups of students are more likely to be experiencing all of these challenges and barriers through no fault of their own or their families, but by circumstance, by zip code, by economic status, by all of these things that are 100% tied to bias and privilege in our country. And then look at the data and say, but see, they underperformed these other kids, without ever looking at all of those factors that, like, as you said, pile on and pile on and pile on, without taking into consideration that we should be looking at that kind of like the original Title I was meant to do, by filling in gaps instead of focusing on standardization. So
Yes.
if we know that you're already experiencing a lot of adversity, a lot of insecurity, a lot of things that put you as a little tiny human person, in a more fragile space, we should be trying to fill that, instead of looking at as confirmation that somehow that validates our frameworks, which are systemically biased.
Well, and if you if you have a child who has food insecurity,
Mm-hmm.
and I've told this story before in other Porch Play Chats, but when I was doing student teacher um, seminars, right? So my student teachers would come back when I was at a 4-year university. My student teachers would come back, and we would talk about having a responsive classroom, using the responsive classroom website and the practices in the responsive classroom of academic choice, and um, using having choice within the day, and children becoming taking initiative, and all of the democratic processes, small d democratic processes that we hope every person has.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had a teacher come back to me who is in a school district in an area that is socially, economically at risk.
Mm-hmm.
And in this program, they have a food program where every child gets a individually wrapped muffin at the beginning of the day, right? So individually wrapped, everybody gets one, and because they have food insecurities. And so there were, I think, 23 kids present in that classroom that morning. This poor student teacher comes in tears, and there were 28 muffins provided, because that's how many kids were in that class typically, but only 23 were there that day. And one of the children got her muffin and ate it. And then she went up to my student and said, I'm still hungry. Any, could I have a part of another one? And the student teacher went to the teacher, and the teacher said, absolutely not. We only have one. That's the rule. And she took the 5 or however many were left over and threw them in the trash, because that was the rule. Right.
Yeah.
And
And that's where
so,
policy and rules get in the way of doing the work we're trying to do sometimes. Yeah.
yeah. And so, it's those sorts of things that if we have children who have food insecurity, then we should be providing food,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, and until every child, you know,
Right.
feels like they're not hungry. And I always also tell this story about this little boy who was, when I was a director, came into my child development program, and the teacher would say all he does is sit at the snack table, because snack was a choice, right? When you're hungry, you go sit at the snack table. He and you serve yourself, and when you're done, you clean up and you wash your hands before you go, and blah 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 blah, right?
Life skills.
And yeah, my goodness, shocking. And so he would live at the snack table, and now he didn't always eat, multiple portions at the snack
Right.
table. He ate until he was full, though, and sometimes that took 2 or 3 snack portions, and they had
Right.
their little Rebus pitchers up there, so they had their little measuring cups and their Cheerios, so all of that, it was very, very child friendly.
Right.
And so I would have to talk to the cook and say, this is a child who has some food insecurities, and he needs to know that there'll be food. And so I'm going to need extra in that classroom. And so then, after 4, 5, 6, 7 days in the classroom, he began to move to other areas of the room, but he would just make sure there was something
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
bowl. But he would, and then when he trusted that there was going to be enough food,
Right.
then he was fine. But it took 2.5 weeks of building that trust. And the teacher said he's going to throw up. Well, if he throws up, okay, we'll, do something else. But right now, he just needs to make sure that there's going to be food available. And, that when I taught kindergarten, I was in a poor area,
Mhm.
and, children brought their snacks, right? Well, we had children that
Had
couldn't
no snacks to bring.
bring
Yeah.
snacks. So I checked all the allergies, and we didn't have as many as we do now, which is a whole nother topic. But, and I went to Costco and bought snacks. Yeah, haven't we all?
Yep.
And they were available.
Right. For
That
whomever needed them.
Yes, and if they were hungry still, they could go get one, right? It was available. So that
Right.
was a relief for those children who had food insecurities, so they could focus on something else instead of, how am I going to fill my
Right.
hungry belly?
Yeah.
And so I think it's these crazy things, and we're going to have to do this again. It's these practical little
Yeah.
things that we could do to mitigate
Right.
those things that children are walking in with.
Right.
And, I had a family that was socially, economically fine,
Mm-hmm.
and their child had food insecurity because they were worried they were going to gain too much weight. And so, it
Come
doesn't,
from lots of places, right? All of these things that are filters that learning has to go through, like affective and physical and cognitive and environmental filters that whatever we're trying to do in this learning space have to get through. And they can come from all kinds of places, certainly not just a certain type of student, right? You could have a very wealthy family, but the parents are gone all the time and there's some insecurity there because, it's inconsistent childcare, whatever, there's all the reasons. But, I think play as a lever or as a mechanism for kind of equalizing the playing field, to use that turn of phrase, so to speak, it helps kind of address some of these other things that the child is experiencing or dealing with so that we can get to the learning. But we've just been trying to go like, just got
yeah, we've been trying to
alphabet
shove it down their
kids,
throats. And
right?
there's so
Yeah.
much that's not what they need at that moment,
Right.
right? In
Right.
order to be able
Right.
to take in something else. They have, they're hurting, their teeth hurt because they haven't had dental care. They're
Right.
hungry, they're sick because they have an ear infection. All of those, I mean, how are you when you're sick, right? You can't, right?
Or even if they're not consciously aware of having, something that is taking center stage in their thoughts or in their feelings, playful learning is just more opportune and rich and ripe for deep, meaningful engagement in content.
Mm-hmm.
It's more opportune for sustained engagement in content, more than a worksheet or an app. And so even if we're not trying to mitigate negative influences, we increase the positive influences by engaging in learning that is really active and choice filled and aligned with what we're trying to teach. I'm not saying just it's a free for all and do whatever you want, but if we spend time exploring and investigating and writing for a sustained period of time and thinking and talking and reading for a sustained period of time, we're going to get better outcomes than these little snippets of extrapolated blanks and excerpts of things that we're seeing in classrooms right now. So I do believe it mitigates a lot of the risk, but I also believe it simultaneously enhances the positive
Yes.
in a way that is an equity lever. The hashtag that I kind of coined, I think I coined it. If somebody else did it before me, I'm unaware of it. So I'm not trying to take credit where it's not due, but play in school is an equity issue. It is not a luxury. It is not what you do when you have time at the end of the day. It's not something that you should be doing because your kids scored high enough on the pretest that you can justify it. It
Mhm.
is the mechanism for learning. It is the equity lever.
It is. And it's a biological necessity. That's how we develop.
Right.
And we develop across every domain if we just are have the opportunity. And when in kindergarten, I didn't ever teach above kindergarten because I didn't like what they were doing in first grade. But in kindergarten, it was joyful, playful. I mean, we had dramatic play and we had blocks and we had manipulatives and we had a science area and we had a sensory table and we had art and we had, all the things that you need. And children went where they were interested. Now, did they have not worksheets, but they had work jobs, that in a 2.5 hour kindergarten, which is what I had, there was probably an hour and a half, hour and 15 minutes of play.
Mm-hmm.
And well, no, I'm going to say an hour and a half of play in a 2.5 hour. And then we were outside for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And so, we did morning meeting, which was not calendar or the weather, right? Children at 5 know what the weather is outside. And but we played for an hour, I would say a good hour and a half inside. And I just said, introduced at morning meeting at the end. I have 3 work jobs. Sometime during your play today, I'd like you to go to the work job that's over in the manipulative area, go to the work job that's over here. And then when you're done, it was all hands-on, all experiential. Bring it to me on your little McDonald's tray, because I went to McDonald's and begged. And let me see what you've done, and then you can go and play, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you can play for however long you want. Just make sure you get those 3 work jobs done. And that was our day.
Self-regulation, time management, personal control, inhibitory control, working memory, all of those things are being developed. Language is being developed, and as a teacher, you're getting real-time formative assessment data,
Exactly.
and it's
Every day.
differentiated inherently, because if I see your tray has, evidence of understanding this, but maybe not that, it gives me information about how to scaffold you moving forward. And we, a lot of my colleagues doing some of this play work, certainly free play has myriad benefits, inside, outside, but we are seeing the most academic growth from purposeful or guided play. So, the goal would be ideally to strike a balance and have both.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be happy to have any in some of the classrooms that I'm visiting where we're not really seeing that at all.
No. And so that balance, and I always tell this story. The principal came to me after I'd been there a couple of years and said to me, why do all the first grade teachers want your kids? And I had to tell him, I had to say to him, you have to, you can't be mad. And he would say, well, why would I be mad? I'm just asking. You can't be mad. And he had given me my very first year there the canned curriculum, the 3.5-inch binder, and said, this is your curriculum, with shrink wrapped. And it went in the back of my closet and I never opened it. And so I went and got it, dug out, everything, after he promised not to be mad. And he said, what do you mean you never opened the curriculum? And, I said to him, the curriculum was written by people who don't understand the children in this classroom or where they are developmentally. So I assess them in play-based observations to figure out where they are. And then we work from there. And that's why the first grade teachers want my kids.
And I
Because
think, right. And that's that kind of both and that I was talking about in that paper that you referenced, but like we can be rigorous and playful. We can have academic targets and learning outcomes and standards in mind and be playful. It is not an either or situation. So
Yes. And I think that's the piece that we need to pull forward, but we also have to give it definition, because when we say academically focused and playful, we don't mean worksheets. We mean
right,
active,
right.
engaging learner that are differentiated based on where the children are, not what the curriculum tells us to do. Oh my goodness, Karyn,
And
this
I
is
believe would
amazing.
actually give us better outcomes
Of
through
course
it
it
in the
would.
short term for that child, but throughout P12 and into college and career and the lifespan by
Yeah.
building these skills. So it's not, my argument continues to be, and I think those of us researching in the space continue to find enough evidence. I don't know what enough is going to look like to convince um, kind of the majority to start shifting direction, that this is good for all sorts of long-term reasons, interdisciplinarily, economically, environmentally, academically, and career, like health, physical and emotional health, all of these things,
Mhm.
all of these trajectories that kids, will end up on, that will affect us as a society. Play is the magic bullet. I think,
Play is
not
the
the magic
magical
curriculum, but like,
formula. It really is. And so, oh my goodness, this has been amazing. But you have to come back, so we have to dive deeper into this,
okay, all right,
into specific
skills.
strategies. But this was
Okay.
a great introduction to how, in the primary grades and in the middle grades and in the secondary grades and at the college level, that we need to be more playful in our approaches and our teaching strategies. And my students get the competencies. I've been doing this research study with my child development students for, I think I'm on my 7th year now. And so all my face-to-face child development students, I pull up each course competency on the second day of class that we have. And I say, on a scale of 1 to 8, I want you to tell me how competent you feel. And it's a survey that they do online, but we do it in class. And so they say, oh, I don't know anything about that competency. And they're honest. And I say, please be honest, because this class, these are the competencies I hope that you will have mastered by the end of the course. So just be honest. And it's not graded. If actually get points for filling it out, right? And so we go down through each of the competencies, and at the end I do it again. And the pre-post is amazing.
Yeah,
And it's because we play.
yeah, yeah.
uh, and and those competencies are met because they're actually doing something physically and active. um
Constructive, experiential, all of the things. Yeah.
Everything. The research is pretty, I mean, it's pretty evident based on the pre and post score. So those are the kinds of things that I need to write a paper on, that are
In your spare time.
um, yeah, in my spare time, yeah, that demonstrate that even in a college classroom it's effective. And so imagine how effective it would be. All right, so we're gonna stop because I've taken lots of your
We
time,
keep talking.
but don't go anywhere. I'll be right. Don't just stay right there while I finish this up. So Karyn, thanks so much. So to learn more about IPA USA, just visit our website at ipausa.org. And until next time, keep on playing.